People will join in as we begin. So I see Farzana is waiting in the wings, which is excellent. And I am going to talk a little bit about Farzana before I invite her on screen. So she is our mastermind clinician of the month, and she'll be here for a Q&A about all things psychospiritual in counseling, in her life, in her writing. So Farzana, let me introduce you before I bring you on screen so we can talk about everything spiritual. Farzana Doctor is a Toronto-based social worker, and she has a psychotherapy practice. She's also an award-winning author of 3 books. I think she's on her 4th. She can clarify that when she comes on. So she's going to talk to us today about herself, and we're going to focus on this book, which I really enjoyed reading and can't wait to talk about it with her. It's called All Inclusive. It's her most recent book, and I'm just looking at my notes here because I want to get the titles correct in terms of the awards it's won. So that book, All Inclusive, was named one of CBC Books' top 10 women writers you need to read now. There's a suggestion. She was also voted by Toronto's Now magazine as best author. And she was voted by, I think it was Kobo. Her book was the best book in the Kobo Best Book Award category of what was it called? Canadian writers, is it? Sorry, I can't read my own notes. Canadian favorites, best book. Sorry about that, Farzana. So I asked Farzana to facilitate a workshop at our June conference, and she named the workshop Spirits in the Office. And the focus of that workshop and the focus of our talk today is integrating the spiritual, the S word, into psychotherapy. She certainly does that in her writing in a very masterful way. And so we get to have her all to ourselves for a little while this evening. So thank you, Farzana, for agreeing to do this and to give up your time in the middle of a very, very busy time, I know, for you personally and professionally. Let's see, how do I want to start? Well, I guess I'll start by bringing Farzana on screen. So I'm just going to invite Farzana on screen. She'll be here same way we do this as per the usual. If you have a question for Farzana, hi Farzana.
How are you?
Good. Can you see everything, hear everything okay?
Everything is just right.
Okay, excellent. Guys, just let us know if there's any feedback or anything like that. Okay. If you guys have a question that you want to ask Farzana, you can just click on the Ask a Question section below. And, okay, so I'm going to try something here. There's a little bit of feedback. Okay, hold on. Is there still feedback? I just toggled Farzana's mic for a second, which means we won't be able to hear her until I bring her. Sorry, Farzana, I can't hear you laughing. I can see you laugh, but I'll bring you back on when it's time to answer a question or time to talk. Does that help with the feedback, Kathy? Better. Okay. Okay. And so I'll bring the microphone back on when it's time. I feel like a kindergarten teacher now. When it's time to speak, and then when you're speaking, I'll have to toggle my microphone off. And so when you guys have a question, just click the Ask a Question category or just type something on the side. I'm just more likely to see it if you click on the Ask a Question category. So, Farzana, I'll just start by asking you about your book first, then your counseling practice, and then we'll see what kinds of questions come up. And by the way, guys, I have a little green button underneath here that says order the book. So if at any point you want to order the book, Farzana has kindly arranged for us to have a 30% discount. So you just use the code all30, which I'm just going to type in now, just in case you haven't done that. Sorry for that interruption there. So Farzana, you start off your book. You weave in so many wonderful themes, and it's such an engaging book. I was reading it, I don't know if you remember, I told you I was reading it, not this Costa Rica trip, but last year's Costa Rica trip. And I started reading it on the plane. And so you know what happens fairly early on in here. There is a very detailed, gripping description of a plane crash. And I'm reading it during turbulence. And I thought to myself, oh, you know, I should probably like not read this part of the book during turbulence. But it was so good, I couldn't put it down. It made it more so like I was right there. So in this wonderful book, you do weave in the spiritual along with the very earthly. And you begin weaving in that spiritual right at the beginning with your dedication, which is for the ancestors who continue to guide me long after they've left this world. So my first question for you is, I'm going to toggle off your mic here, is do the ancestors guide you?
I think so. And it's so lovely to be chatting with you. And thanks for inviting me. I think that the ancestors guide all of us, even if we're not even aware that it's happening. So I would say that, you know, it's only the last few years that I became kind of aware of my mother, my dead mother, who's been in my life guiding me, and some others who I don't know, specifically guiding my writing. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like when I'm in the office and having a very creative moment with clients, there are helpers around.
I think so too. I never say that, of course, out loud to clients, but I think when we're having our best therapeutic moments, we're really channeling.
Yes. And I think we do have to be careful about how we talk about this. You mentioned the S word, and it is the S word for lots of people, including our clients. I had one client some years ago give me feedback that I was too esoteric. And even back then I barely talked about spirituality. So it can really scare people if they're not comfortable with this sort of stuff. And so you very much have to, like any issue, you have to follow the client's lead. But I have been much more out about talking about these issues as a clinician, and certainly as a writer. Probably the writing was the starting point for me to be out about talking about these things.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit? Just how your maybe connection with the spiritual influenced your writing, how that kind of occurred?
I had a really big moment with this book, All Inclusive. So I'd been writing, this is my third novel, and I had reached a place where I was feeling very creatively blocked. And it was at a very bad moment because I had actually taken some time off of my private practice just to dedicate to writing. And I suddenly just found I couldn't write. I sent drafts that I thought were like pretty much done, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong with them, to my agent and to other writers, and they gave me the thumbs down. They couldn't figure out what was wrong either, but they were just like, something's wrong with this book. My agent said, I give you permission to give up on this book. It was very odd. Like, it was very negative across the board feedback. So I just stopped writing. And then I was teaching an emerging writers workshop. And the really thing about emerging writers is that they just have such faith in writing still. They just want to write. It's just a beautiful process. They don't have as much of the kind of fears of the industry that you have when you've been writing for a while. Will it get published? Will people like it? What will the reviewers think? All that sort of stuff. So I finished that workshop, and I was leaving, and I thought, well, maybe I can get back to this novel. Maybe I can resurrect it. And I was riding my bike along the hills around High Park, which are really rolling hills. And I was careening down a hill, and I heard a voice in my head saying, I'm your missing character, and here's the missing plot. And I stopped my bike, and I thought, oh my God, I don't want to write that. And like, what was that? But I didn't have any better ideas. So I started writing exactly that, and I threw out another couple of plot lines and minor characters. And this character and this plot just fit in seamlessly where there was space left behind. And when I reflected on that and started talking about that more openly in the world, I started hearing more writers saying, yeah, that's what happens to me too. And when I reflect back on my first and second novels, I think that was happening for me as well, that I was being guided.
And when you think of it, you were riding your bike and there was rolling hills. You were probably in a trance state. So you were accessing, I have to bring that in, I do. So
yeah, I think so. Right? So often our unconscious, our creative unconscious is at work when our conscious mind is checked out, right? That's how hypnosis works, right? So I was probably a little checked out in terms of my conscious mind. Mm-hmm.
And in touch with, I don't know if you want to call it your own inner wisdom, but also the wisdom of the spirit world. Who knows what that is, but that other sphere where there's all this big wisdom that needed to be expressed. So what about bringing that element to therapy? I mean, how do you do that, or do you do that with clients, that invitation to access beyond our conscious narratives?
And I would say I've been practicing since 1993, and I was very wary and very shy to talk about spirituality in the early days. And I think what was going on was I kind of felt it was a bit of a private thing for clients. It was a private world, and we don't talk about religion much in polite society. Of course, if people told me certain things, like maybe they were coming out as gay and trying to figure out their religion, of course I would talk about that and ask them how they felt, but I wouldn't invoke the spiritual as a tool. And I recall many years ago, how the College of Social Workers puts out that magazine, and in the back pages are the disciplinary notes, and we read about how social workers did something bad and then were disciplined. And one of the notes I read was about a woman who was offering spiritual counseling as part of her regular counseling practice. Now, I don't know what she did wrong that so upset that client, and perhaps there was something unethical happening in terms of informed consent. I don't know. But that was one of those moments where I thought, oh my gosh, like what could happen to me if, clients think I'm too esoteric. And I felt a bit of a dampening down of that. But, as time passed, I think a lot of people, when you become more experienced, you just realize that the work you're doing is very sacred. And you're just going to do the best work you possibly can. And so I found myself asking many more deepening questions as spiritual issues started to arise. And when I had a good enough rapport with a client where I felt like it was fine to do so, I started asking people about their spiritual lives and how they felt about, did they have a spiritual practice? Did they want one? How did they feel about that? And so on. Yeah. So that was a growing sort of thing. But before that, there was a real schism. I had my own personal spiritual life, but there was a schism in terms of whether I could talk about that with clients or even in my literary world. I'm just going to let the dog out because she's crying. I don't know if you can hear her.
I thought it was kids. I thought there were kids in the background, but oh, look at the nice roses. Oh, you're back. Okay, that didn't take long to let the dog out. Well, that's exactly it, is that it's taking the lead from the client. You're asking the deepening questions. And I don't know about you, but I have found in the last 2 years, maybe it's just who I am and who I am attracting, or maybe there is an actual shift going on, but there seems to be much more of a request, like, please recognize my path, my spirituality, and please bring it in.
Yes, and one of the things I've done as a way to attract those clients to my practice is I've specifically written on my website that I enjoy having those kinds of conversations and helping people sort out some of those things. So it's kind of front and center now. I also say I do hypnosis because I wanted to attract more clients who are interested in that.
Yeah, and it is a certain, well, not always, but it often is a person who's, let's say, more open to integrative therapies when you bring in the clinical hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Before I move on, does anyone out there want to chime in? I know you're out there, like the spirit world, but yeah, chime in. Let us know about any of these issues, how you bring in the spiritual, or if you have any questions for Farzana so far. If not, I'll move on. While they're thinking about that, Farzana, I wanted to reference a little passage from your book. There's a passage I want you to read as well. But I highlighted a little section because so much of the book is about searching for identity and meaning and connection, both in the spiritual realm as well as, in our everyday human life, just hanging out here on Earth. And so I just wanted to read a little passage without giving away any names, because I don't want to give away any big parts of the book. But it's about a spirit, an ancestor, communicating with a character in the book. And they're communicating telepathically, but you're addressing some pretty heavy issues of gender identity. So it's, if anyone's following along here, it's I start at the bottom of 145. So it just starts with the ancestor who is in the spirit realm saying, I'd forged a deep connection with her. Talking about this character, I'd forged a deep connection with her. We'd been communicating since her babyhood, and she continued to hear me even as a young adult. It was our psychic communion that piqued her interest in spiritual matters, and she became a Buddhist as well as a Muslim. She invited me in during her meditation sessions, her easy breathing and open mind facilitating our silent conversations. So the character says, "Are you there?" She called out telepathically to me when she was 23. "I'm always here whenever you want. I have something on my mind." "Go ahead, tell me." "I think I want to transition. Be a man." Her idea, only recently acknowledged and still a secret, puffed out boldly. She had been a tomboy, the fastest runner in her school. As a teenager, she'd cut her hair short and refused her mother's pushy feminine fashion sense. Now, as a young adult, her spirit was genderless, but her terrestrial body and mind were certainly leaning toward the masculine. Her parents did not approve. Follow your heart. You can be a man if you want. Why not? Simple and unconventional advice, I know, but death allowed that. I thought that was so lovely. Just that simple advice from a spirit. Follow your heart. That simple and unconventional advice. And I thought I'd ask you how you might bring in that follow your heart to those rather meaty issues and that rather meaty social narrative of things like gender identity and other questions people might be grappling with.
I'm thinking about a client who has been transitioning and has a really strong sense of two grandmothers who are deceased, who are a big part of their lives. And so in those moments where everything seems to be falling inward because it seems so overwhelming, because they've let me know already that they have this feeling about these grandmothers, and that actually, I think they let me know this during a hypnosis when we were calling in a resource. So since then, I've been able to use that, and I've said, okay, is it time to ask your grandmothers to be a resource? This person will just be able to close their eyes, feel calm, and hear some wise words, which might be their own, which might be, you know, an internalized grandmother, might be the grandmother, might be anybody else, I don't know. But it's a very useful process in therapy because this person feels immediately protected. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is amazing. And the person accesses this themselves. Yeah, that's the beauty of it.
They need a reminder. I've asked, like, what is your spiritual practice at home? And while they believe that it would be a good idea to have one, and they've set up a few structures in order to try to facilitate that, they don't seem to do it much on their own. So therapy is a place where there's a bit of a practice for it. And I'm hoping that it will become something that happens more when the overwhelm hits at home.
Nice. That's nice. You like give them permission to do that, and they associate your office with that safe place and that sacred space. Yeah. I'm just reading some of the comments here. There is one comment from Corinne. Hi, Corinne. She says, I advertise spiritually integrated psychotherapy. There is a researcher, therapist, writer, Ken, don't know how to say the last name, who has written a book on it. My studies were in spiritual care and psychotherapy, and I definitely find most people who come to me come mainly because I offer. Yeah, and that's what I find too. Once you know, if you build it, people will come. Your people will find you. So, and people who are really hungry for this integrative psychotherapy will definitely be at your doorstep. But it's great that you're putting it out there on your website and the way you're promoting yourself. I don't know that author. Kathy is saying, I've been using my spiritual whole practice, which started in addictions, including body, mind, and spirit. Then Kathy has added Reiki and hypnotism and has used a separate pamphlet for Reiki. And the small town, not open. The small town isn't open to Reiki, looks like. Ahead of my time, so to speak. Now I still must be. Maybe I attract this type of client. I call them sensitives. Not all of my clients know this aspect of my practice, and I now have a combined pamphlet. Oh, so Kathy is taking the step where I know a lot of people do have it separate. Maybe they do hypnosis or Reiki, meditation. They'll have it as a separate service from therapy, but sounds like Kathy has integrated it. So it's all on a combined pamphlet. How's that going, Kathy? Integrating everything into the one. She'll let us know. Yeah, Corinne, in terms of you with spiritually integrated psychotherapy, I am just wondering, do you ever get people who aren't aware of your background, and how do you bring that forward, or do you bring that forward? I know I have on my intake form, I have questions and a checklist where I ask about their interests. I do ask about their spirituality. So I know different people do it in different ways, but it'd be nice to get a couple of more people just letting us know. Oh, is it the dog?
Just turning on a light.
Ah,
Just noticing I was looking a little dark.
yeah, great. Yeah, so we'll just, I don't know if Kathy or Corinne, oh, here we go. I just want to read Corinne's. I definitely clearly state on my website that those interested, based on my own experience. She doesn't usually ask on the intake if they have any spiritual background. Okay. Kathy says it's going well, taking a more integrative approach. People see the Reiki table at the offices. Some never ask. Well, yeah, I have the same situation currently. That some never ask, and I have a Reiki table because people also sometimes like to lie down on the Reiki massage table, basically for hypnosis as well. I will mention if they are mentioning something that may make me feel they may need or want. Okay, thanks, guys. Yeah. I'm just reading Corinne's here. That I think that's key. What Corinne is raising, that if people don't ask, don't pursue. So like we're using our intuition as well. Don't you think?
Yes, and if people are uncomfortable, you stop, right? And sometimes I've asked the question, do you have any spiritual beliefs? Are they important to you? And they'll say, no, absolutely not. And I'll make a very firm kind of note in my mind that this is not an area. And so hypnosis might look quite different for those kinds of clients as well, right? Because there are some forms of hypnosis that feel more spiritual and ones that feel more behaviorally kind of oriented. And so just like regular talk therapy, you stay out of that area. I would do that as well in the hypnosis. Otherwise, they'll reject it, right?
Right, you're tailoring it to the client. Yeah, yeah. I agree 100%. Yeah. What about the fears? You mentioned a little bit about, you know, you had read this one disciplinary action note, and then you kind of did a regrouping internally. In terms, I know that when I'm just talking with colleagues, there is still some fear. I don't know if it's just encoded in our DNA or if it's because of our regulatory colleges, but like, how do you address that in our?
Yeah, I think part of it is we have to look at our own personal histories around spirituality and religion, and the ways that maybe it's harmed us, the ways that maybe it was discouraged, interfered with. Because at least my perspective, and a lot of people share this perspective, is that you come into the world with a deep spiritual kind of understanding or way of processing the world, and then that kind of gets discouraged blatantly or more covertly over time, right? Like I have a story that I used to see spirits as a child, and then was told, no, there's nothing there, and then I stopped. So I think we can be quite encouraged to stop all of this, right? So I think that, and I also come from a religious community that is quite a fundamentalist community that is in some ways almost cultish. So, you know, put all of that stuff together, and this whole realm would be something that feels either like something not to talk about or something a little, something to keep very private, secret, and a little scary. So I think everybody has to look at, what is it for them? Where does all of this reside? Where would the fear come from? A lot of the time, I think it's from our regulatory bodies, but I think it also just comes from our own personal histories. So I think that's the first place to look at the blocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think at the larger level, I mean, we don't have to call healing spiritual, but really healing recovery is about you setting your own path and following it. It's about your journey. So it is spiritual. And I think at a societal level, all of us, whether we're religious or not religious, atheist or agnostic, spiritual or not, we all have that challenge of that social narrative versus following our own path, which I think ultimately, if that's addressed in therapy, it's going to be more powerful, however we do that.
Mm. Yeah. So in the workshop, I'm going to encourage people to look at some of the blocks and fears and what are some of the messages that people may have learned that are kind of like cognitive distortions over time that might be influencing the ways in which they're not following up on openings around how you would deepen the spiritual work in the session. I'm also going to kind of look at what we can do to feel a little protection, because if we are a little afraid of litigious clients or regulatory bodies, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I write my notes, how I do my documentation. Because when I think back to that scary example that I referenced earlier, some of the problems were in the documentation, that it wasn't clear why the therapist went in that direction. It wasn't clear that this was something that was the client's interest or useful to the client. And I think you can find a way to document some of those things so that it's pretty clear what you're up to.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And I'd imagine just that group setting of people noting their fears and going into them and looking at some of the cognitive distortions. You raised something about, yeah, there's the whole piece about how we stay within our scope of practice and all that good stuff. But then there's this whole other missing link that I hadn't thought of before. What about when we miss the client's cues that we fail to pick up on?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When they want or need us to bring in the spiritual.
Because clients can bring their own shyness to talk about this kind of thing, right? So, they might say in passing, I'm an Aries, right? And if you don't say, oh, well, what do you mean by that? How do you think all of that impacts you? It's a little bit like ignoring if they say, well, I'm South Asian, and you don't ask them more questions about something core in their beliefs about themselves or their identity, right? So the offhand remarks that I think are sometimes the clues to just ask another question and ask another question.
Yeah, and I'd never thought of it that way. Like we can miss the cues where we're being invited and people want us to delve into the psycho-spiritual. So how to do that assessment? That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Because they might think, oh, what if this therapist thinks I'm, flaky? Right? We don't want our therapist to think we're flaky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so true. We have fears. They have fears too.
Yeah. I've had clients who have come to a session after astrologer, and they very shyly say, yeah, I went to my family's astrologer, as though like that's something you're not supposed to talk about in therapy. Or they'll mention in passing going for a tarot reading. And, whether or not we believe in tarot or in astrology, something really powerful happens when you go to see those people, right? Like it's a very powerful kind of psychological experience in the very least.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably spiritual too, but like there, it is within our scope of practice to ask about religious, spiritual experiences because there's something very deeply psychological also going on.
Mm-hmm.
I had a client, for example, who for a year she had been coming to talk about the suffering of being dumped. There was this really important relationship and it had ended very badly and she'd been dumped. And for a year, she just could not get over being dumped. And then she mentioned it was offhand, like, well, I went to see my family's astrologer. And then she went on to talk about something else. And I said, wait, what happened? You know, what did you talk about? What's been going on? Yeah, and you know, it really helped because, you know, the astrologer let me know that this was supposed to happen for me. And, you know, that relationship was supposed to end. And, you know, it's about, you know, a new cycle beginning for me. And so then we could talk about, well, did she agree with that? How did she feel about that? And what if that was true? What if it was true that life brought us these kinds of experiences that caused a year of suffering, and yet it was supposed to happen? What does that mean? Like those are my favorite kinds of conversations to have.
And talk about a reframe. That was the missing piece up until that point. And how
Yes, and then she could move on to other things. Finally,
yeah.
it was a relief for me too.
Oh, but you know, if you're going to have any of those breakthrough moments or those aha moments, so often it's exactly when you get that person talking about their psychic or their inner knowing or something fabulous that they're seeing or hearing in trance or in prayer. So, yeah, amazing. Okay, so what do you have your book handy?
Yeah, I do. I managed to find it. It was already packed. I'm in the process of moving, but I found it.
Farzana is in the middle of a move, so I'd imagine, are those flowers part of the staging?
They are, yes. I moved them off of the table, but yes, they are.
They look very nice. Well, one of my favorite passages in this book, I'm hoping you can read it for us, is on page 238. And it's when so Farzana deals with the Air India crash, as well as like so many other seemingly unrelated stuff, but it all kind of fits. So she deals with the Air India crash, and it's so heartbreaking and so beautiful and so poetic the way she brings it in. And there's a piece at the closing of one of the chapters here on page 238 where the ghost, one of the ghosts of Air India, who's not in body anymore, is visiting the memorial structure, the Air India commemorative in Toronto. So for Farzana, oh, she's gone to
Letting in the dog, sorry. Yes. So where would you like me to start from? Just at the beginning of that page?
Yeah, at the top, would that be okay? Because it's just so poetic, and I think we'll get a sense for how you are poetic, and I bet you bring it into therapy too.
So yes. So he has been given this information about the memorial. So this is him heading off in that direction. I traveled south from their home and around the curve of Lake Ontario. It was a windy night and the lake tested the shore. I found the structure, a small plaza with low granite walls and a stone sundial surrounded by water and gardens. Etched into stone was the inscription, "Time flies, suns rise and shadows fall. Let it pass by, love reigns forever over all." Yes, that seemed right. Also carved into the wall were our names, all of them. I rested in that gentle space, reading and rereading each and every one through the night, my voice fluttering up to the stars. While the sundial shadow moved around its circle and the sun rose and the moon tucked itself away, people came and went. Dog walkers and joggers and a tour group. When the gnomon marked solar noon at the crash site, a rollerblader stopped and recited the Al-Fatiha, the first verse of the Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, I sang along with her. And the wind too whispered God's name, and the grass rustled its approval, and the lake splashed its praise.
Thank you. I love that. Love brains for.
That's a real place, by the way. I don't know if when I got up you said that, but it's a real place. It's by Humber Bay Park in Toronto, kind of near Park Lawn and the Lake Shore is where you find that. And it's quite a beautiful memorial. And it's very touching to see all of the names.
Wow, I'd imagine. Well, I haven't been there. I was just imagining it in my mind, but it sounds like a beautiful place to visit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just looking here. Any other questions for the beautiful Farzana? The doctor is in terms of your questions or queries about bringing love in, bringing the spiritual into your counseling, or just about her writing or her merging of her personal and professional writing into therapy. Now's your chance.
I wonder if there's anyone else who does creative writing as well as their healing work. It's a pretty common connection, actually.
You mean you notice a lot of therapists who are also writers?
Yeah, doing some form of creative writing.
I wonder why that is.
You know, for me, it's really helpful to have the balance. I'm not sure that I could be a full-time psychotherapist. I really like doing the half and half work. And I don't know that I would be a full-time writer either. I find both really, really emotionally intense work in different ways, but they complement each other.
Linda is saying maybe we write with the delusion that someone else is actually reading.
Sometimes they are, but I think also just being able to express all of this is such a helpful thing. Yeah.
And it could be because as therapy professionals, maybe we just like putting pieces together. We like an analysis. We like thinking outside the box. So maybe we tend to be those creatives as well, probably a higher proportion.
I also think really healing work. Like even though I'm writing fiction, I'm always working through something on an unconscious level when I'm writing a book. And it might not even be that obvious to me until the book is finished what it is that I'm figuring out. But I think, you know, I think as, you know, therapists, we're needing to do our own healing work all the time. And for me, this is one of the ways.
It's your healing path. You have to do it because it's part of your healing work. It's your medicine. Yeah. Linda's just saying that's what I was thinking. It isn't just writing, but creativity and yeah.
And Kathy mentioned some scripts, and I think that it is really helpful to have a creative outlet because it seems to make I don't follow scripts anymore with hypnosis. I used to, but I find that with coming up with creative paths in hypnosis, I just find it so much easier because I have confidence in my own writing and in my own creativity. So I'll sometimes take clients on journeys that are unexpected because I am just allowing myself to be creative and follow my intuition.
Well, I'm sensing a 2019 workshop on script writing, or off script, I should say, not script writing, but going off script. You could teach a whole workshop on that.
I'm not sure if I could,
Good.
because I don't use scripts. But yeah, it's a lot about kind of just loosening into yourself, relaxing, and really knowing that you can be creative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see that someone has asked a question.
Oh, let me look here. Can you see it? Can you see the question, Farzana?
No, I just see ask a question and the little one. I can go and look.
Okay, it says, I am writing a book about divorce. Oh, Kathy, great. I'm writing a book about divorce, and I do share some personal examples. And one of my fears, here comes a fear, is if published, if I might lose some friends as they may read it and see the part that they have played in my struggle. And yet, I think if you did it, I am entitled to share my perspective on impact it has had to me. What do you think? Must I take these out?
No, it's your story. You're allowed to write it. So with memoirs, people do a couple of different things. Sometimes they'll change the names so that there isn't any sort of public embarrassment for those people. Small community where even if you change names, people might recognize other people, or within like large family groups, that kind of thing. Sometimes what people will do is they'll share the pre-published manuscript or the very early, like before books are on the shelves, like but you have like an early, I can't remember what they're called, but the advanced reading copies. Sometimes they share those with the people who are in the book, and they don't share them to ask for permission because you don't want to do that. But you say, I'm sharing this with you so you have a heads up. Sometimes people will share the work in advance and say, I'm open to feedback, but I might not take it. And so it's a way of kind of respectfully including those friends in the process, but you retain your creative license. Mm-hmm. I can't hear you. I think your mic was off. You're welcome, Kathy.
Sorry, I was just asking if that answered Kathy's question, but she's saying thanks. So it did. Thank you, Farzana.
Mm-hmm. There are quite a lot of workshops out there on writing memoirs where people address this. This is the scariest thing for most people. And CBC Radio has a couple of great kind of literary shows, and you can listen to interviews by people who have written memoirs. This issue comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm. Farzana, just out of curiosity, you mentioned that you're really glad you have your writing life and you wouldn't want to do full-time psychotherapy. Do you find that it's easier for you if you're bringing in the spiritual, or is it easier to stay with the cognitive and the behavioral?
A couple of years ago, I started looking at, when did I feel energized by sessions and when did I feel depleted after sessions? And a couple of trends started to come up. One was when I was doing hypnosis, I was feeling hypnosis, kind of mindfulness, body-based kind of work, spiritual work, that kind of stuff left me feeling energized. While cognitive work, not so much. Of course, you have to bring in a mix of things always, but I do find that just doing that kind of work isn't very energizing for me. And I've written on my website that if you're not interested in some of these things, I might not be a match for you.
Oh, well, that takes courage and years of experience and trust in yourself, but I love it.
Yeah, and a feeling like there's enough work, right? And there's not going to be a scarcity.
Yeah, and so it is.
Mm-hmm.
Screen froze. She missed some of the answer, but that's okay. On the replay, we'll probably get it back, Kathy. So in the words of one of your characters in your book, it looks like you're following the advice of Aziz, which is to follow your heart. Looks like you're doing that.
And I think I followed also your, you gave me some feedback a couple of years ago about, because I had said, I want to do more hypnosis work. I've been wanting to do that for years, but I'm not getting the clients, right? And I was trying to figure out, how am I going to like make that happen? And so one of the things I did was, it just is on all my communications. And I think you suggested that.
Oh, great. Yeah, great advising. No wonder I like the advice. Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, looks like there are no more questions. So maybe we will end it there. I know you probably are busy getting your house staged as you're in the middle of a move. So thank you so much for being with us and for delving into this topic. I see that lots of people are listening. They're too shy yet.
I'm really looking forward to the conference and mingling with all the other like-minded folks.
Yeah, so am I. I think it's, in my opinion, long overdue just to celebrate that we're doing this integrative work and to learn from each other. So thank you for being part of it.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
And you guys, feel free to, I know a lot of you are already coming to the conference, but Farzana is going to be leading a workshop there. You can find info on the website, and you can click on that little green button that says order the book for your 30% discount. Just don't forget to use the code, which is all 30, like 30. Yeah. Oops. Okay. Thanks, guys. And we'll see you next time. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.